Okay, so welcome again to this two-part mini teaching series where we're exploring the logics of trust. And it's logics plural because there's here we're exploring three different ways that we can trust, or three different kind of fundamental ways of thinking that lead to three different kinds of trusting. Um, Last time we got together and talked about the first two and explored them in practice. The first being samsaric logic, which is rooted in conditional trust, the basic form of which is if this, then that. If I do this, then I'll get that. Based on thinking about achieving conditional results through conditional means. Okay, basic thing that keeps us locked into this never ending cycle of rebirth because we have to keep figuring out some new person to become to like resolve our suffering because the worse than we are currently is obviously insufficient. Nirvanic logic is when we give up that search, when we stop being moved by that logic of lack, of suffering, and instead come to see that just this is how it is. There's nothing more that needs to be done in this moment uh, to be more this than this is. There's no more thisness. There's no more this that we can add. You can always make things more expansive, more pleasant. There's all kinds of ways and things which experience can be more certain ways. But nirvanic logic isn't about that. That's samsaric logic. Nirvanic logic's about just recognizing the isness, the way it is, the way that every state is, the one taste. Now, sometimes people will confuse this with non-duality. In fact, they'll call it non-duality. Um, it's just not. I remember talking to David Loy, author of a book called Non-Duality. I always reference him as an authority when talking about non-duality, since he wrote a book on the title. But obviously he doesn't hold himself as a firm authority. But when talking to David about this after he returned back from the Science and Non-Duality conference, he was kind of just kind of joking about how so many people there seem to be interested in a kind of dualistic non-duality. That when you get into being and nirvana and emptiness and there's nothing, there's no self and you can just relax into the infinite void. Okay, well, that's people describing nirvanic logic. But the logic there seems to be like, let's get out of samsara and into nirvana. And let's just escape the conditional realm. Let's just get out of here. And people will pretend or claim that they have done so until, of course, you piss them off or say something that bothers them, or until they get cancer. And then it's like, oh wait, I guess where did your unconditional freedom go? Now that you're freaking out. And invariably that's what I see happens, at people at the stage where they understandably are trying to solidify a position in the unconditioned so that they don't suffer anymore. And they think, oh, this must be possible. What they're doing here, and what we naturally do, is we turn nirvana into some samsaric achievement. We think, okay, yeah, like I got it. And now I'm gonna be in this forever. Yeah, well, you can't avoid it, but that doesn't nirvana doesn't mean samsara stops manifesting. This is where we start getting into the paradox of non-duality and where the second turning of Buddhism begins. The first evolution of Buddhism, early Buddhism as it's known, or Sutrayana Buddhism, was very interested in transcending samsara. My mentor David Loy, referred to this as cosmological dualism. Thinking that there are these two different realities, nirvana and samsara, and you can get out of samsara into nirvana. Well, the logic of Buddhism changes in the second turning 1,000 years after the Buddha's around. There's a someone called Nagarjuna who says nirvana is samsara and samsara is nirvana, which is a radical claim that there's no separation between these two different realities. Later, this gets formulated as form is emptiness, and emptiness is form in the Heart Sutra. Same message, same view. And this is the view of non duality. Not that we are trying to extinguish ourselves in nirvana. That's the logic of early Buddhism. That's a dualistic logic. Rather, we're realizing our simultaneous nature as both human and being. We're both human and we're a being. Uh, the Dharma of being human is how I sometimes teach on the two truths of Nagarjuna. The two truths are the basis for samsaric logic and nirvanic logic. The personal truth is samsara. It is true from the point of view of being a person that we are driven by lack and that there are things we could do better. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, the famous Zen master who wrote Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, was, asked by his students, what should we do? Are we perfect the way that we are, or should we keep sitting zazen so we can become better? Something like that. That's the basic nature of the question that was asked. And he's like, well, you are perfect the way you are, and you could be much better. You could do better. Um, and that's simultaneously true from the point of view of this non-dual logic. If samsaric logic is if this, then that, that's the form of the logic, and nirvanic logic is just this, I would call non-dual logic both this and that, referring to the previous logics. It's just both the logic that can make distinctions and think about things in conditional terms. This gives rise to that, which affects this, which impacts that. Even if you think of it in more complex, non-linear ways, right? Still, we're thinking causally at the level of samsaric logic. And then nirvanic logic is acausal. It's not in the realm of conditionality that we're talking. It's the realm of thisness, which applies to all conditions, which is why it's unconditioned. And in that moment of recognizing thisness, right? Suchness, isness, cessation, the unborn, the unconditioned, whatever you want to, however you want to refer to this dimension of experience, there's freedom. There's absolute freedom because you're no longer limited by the conditional realm, which is exactly why people want to set up shop here. uh, and of course, you can't set up shop there except insofar as you can set up shop in a provisional identity. You can claim to be the enlightened one. I remember there's this guy that Kenneth used to have online debates with. Um, and he used to sign every one of his emails with the phrase stillness. His name was Gary Weber. And Gary claimed to be, I always referred to him as the no thought guy. Gary claimed to have no more thoughts and to only experience stillness and to not love his wife or daughter anymore. And like he had this vision of enlightenment or this claimed experience of enlightenment in which he was completely impersonal. And I would argue with Gary about his view of enlightenment, and he seemed to get awfully upset when challenged and debated and disagreed with, just like me. And I noted that. And I thought, wow, it's so interesting, isn't it? That we can have a view of enlightenment that's so powerfully impersonal that even while being upset and debating, we can kind of like still sign stillness at the end and not recognize the weird incongruence of what's happening and what we're claiming is happening. Anyway, maybe Gary wasn't experiencing any thoughts and he was just unruffled, even as in the relative terms he interacted with me. Or maybe he was just super dissociated and he had trouble being alive. I don't know. I don't know what's going on with that, but that's not my experience. To me, the non-dual experience is one where I'm both this completely imperfect, often sometimes fucked up human being who has all these talents and gifts and strengths and unique perspectives, and I am the empty void that is makes all this flexible, that makes it fluid, that makes it not so um unbearably uh asphyxiating in terms of its closeness. Like imagine if this really was all you are. How terrifying that would be. Ah, Okay, non-dual logic. Uh, Samsaric logic, the basis of it is conditional trust. If this, then that. Nirvanic logic, the basis is unconditional trust. Just this. Non-dual logic, the basis of it is both this and that. And I would call this here appropriate trust. Appropriate trust based on the famous Zen koan in which Zen Master Yun Men was asked, "What is the highest, most profound teachings of all the Buddhas?" And Yun Men replied, "An appropriate response." It's a great koan because, in the very moment the Zen student is trying to kind of figure out the greatest, highest teachings of every, the universal teachings, all the Buddhas have always taught. What is it that they've all taught? And in that very moment of asking this of Yun Men, he responds in that moment to this particular monk an appropriate response, which is, in fact, the appropriate response. This guy's up in his like, oh, ideals, universal, whatever. He brings him right back to here, an appropriate response, which he just demonstrated, not as an abstract idea or theory, but in reality. He just showed him how it's done. That's Zen. Okay. That's the non dual. When we're in non dual logic, we just know is needed and we do it. And if we don't, then we've fallen out of that logic. We're falling into some other logic. Uh, we see what's lacking and we respond appropriately while not taking the lack in any way fundamentally seriously in non-dual logic. It's everything is workable in non-dual logic. We don't deny the reality of things and we don't deny their workability because they're empty. If they weren't empty, they wouldn't be workable. So in non-dual logic, everything is workable.